morning again. So this morning we are doing another in this sort of occasional series where we look at, like across the Bible, at a big picture way of seeing the whole story. Now, none of these can tell you the whole story, but they are like different angles that help us see what's going on. So, I don't know if anyone remembers the first one we did. I remember by looking back at my notes. The very first one that we did, we talked about the humanity being made in the image of God and what that meant, and how right in the beginning, in the picture we're given in the Garden of Eden, God creates humans and sets them to rule the creation. Rule in God's wisdom, rule in cooperation with God, but actually a really exalted, a high calling and a responsible calling for humanity. And we thought a little bit about how, for each one of us today, we still have realms of real control where we are called by God to rule, whether that be the things that we decide to think about, the decisions that we make, the way we care for our own bodies, and the way we relate to our family and friends and neighbors around us. Where we have control and the ability to decide, do we continue to live well in the image of God, living by God's wisdom? And that's one way of looking at the whole picture. Jesus comes to restore us, to give us the capability of living well and ruling well, as we were called to be rulers in the first place. Then, actually, about quite close to this time last year, maybe 10 months ago, we looked at unity in the Spirit. And we looked at how the Bible story has humanity being fractured, again, right from the picture we get in the Garden of Eden, through the Tower of Babel, through the tribes and brothers fighting each other, all the way down through the Old Testament stories. And then we get this awesome moment that Jesus makes possible, where on the day of Pentecost, after Jesus has risen and gone to be with God and his Father in heaven, the Spirit of God is sent to unify. But it's weird because it doesn't undo everything that's happened. The point in the Tower of Babel is that God divides up and people have different language and they can't understand each other. And on Pentecost, everybody doesn't get the one language, but God does make it possible for everyone with different languages, in all our differences, all to hear the message of rescue and the message of unity. And then the third one we looked at was God's commitment to be with us. We looked at how people drive him away, we walk away from God. But first off, really, in the Old Testament, we get the picture of the tabernacle, a tent where God can come and live in this zone, in the middle of his people. Because that is what God's heart is. To be in the middle of us, with us. We get this awesome picture of Jesus coming to be in our mess in Christmas and to stay with us in the Spirit, through the Spirit in our hearts. And then the fourth one, which was the most recent one, where I had a bit of a construction going on here in the middle. And we thought about bringing near things, which we normally translate as sacrifices. But actually the core word in Hebrew is bringing near things. And it's a bit like the whole sacrificial system in the Old Testament. It's a bit like having a security pass, which allows you to go somewhere you wouldn't otherwise be able to go, into God's presence. And how often, like the whole burnt sacrifices, people might translate it, is like my representative being transformed by fire to be able to rise into God's presence. And that foreshadows my representative, Jesus, being transformed by death into a new life where he can rise and be with the Father as my representative. Yeah? So each one of these is a sort of different angle on the full picture. None of them are complete in themselves. So what I'm going to talk about this morning is not a complete picture of the gospel in itself, but it does help us see one angle better, maybe, of what's going on and what God is doing for us. So, the reading that we had, Kerry, you may have noticed something, or you may have not. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. Here is my servant, whom I have chosen, the one I love, in whom I delight. Nice verse. What's the problem? Let me tell you what I think the problem is. Chosen. Anyone ever chosen anything or anyone? The answer is yes. So what do you do when you choose something or someone? You get your set of options, alternatives, and then from that set, you pick one. Yeah? That's what we do. Is that true of Jesus? Did God the Father think, I need someone to do this whole rescue thing. Let me pull up the relevant candidates. I've got all this to choose. I've got all these people. I will choose one. Is that what happened? Well, I don't think that is what happened. Although it sounds like God could have chosen others in this verse, well, elsewhere, that's not the way it's pictured at all. Elsewhere, we have, in Matthew's Gospel, the record of the voice from heaven saying, "This is my son." Not, "This is one of my kids that I'm picking out." And John expands it more obviously in the famous 3:16, "My one and only son." There's no hint of selection there. Jesus is a total one-off. He's not chosen. Jesus actually says it himself. He says, "I have come down from heaven not to do my will, but to do the will of the one who sent me." He positions himself absolutely uniquely in coming from heaven to live life on earth. And it's not just Matthew and John. Luke says he's chosen, but also the unique son. And Peter describes Jesus as chosen by God and precious to God. So what is it? Is Jesus absolutely unique? Or is Jesus one who was chosen from options? think about something else. Now, there's going to be a series of pictures, and sometimes I'll say, who's this? And of course, I have no idea what these people look like, and neither do you. But there might be clues in the picture, so bear with me sometimes. Okay, so, who's this? No, you pick up on the clue. Excellent. So you know the way these things, big picture things go. I talk quite a lot, and you have to trust me, because you're very happy to look everything up afterwards, but I'm not going to go verse by verse by verse by verse to reference things as we go through, because it would take all day. So let's think about Noah. What was the situation? God had created the world, and humanity was destroying the world. The picture we're given is that God is thrown into deep sorrow because of the violence and the murder and the corruption that is going around everywhere. Genesis 6:5 and so on. And God is deeply upset. And he says, I can't just let this evil run wild. I have to do something. So God decides to decreate the world and to destroy humanity. But not quite every humanity. God says this to Noah. The flood is coming, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Now, the English doesn't really help us here very much, but that you, I will establish my covenant with you, is singular. God is speaking to Noah, and only Noah. So God chooses a chosen one, and in this instance, Noah responds to God with trust. And he does this remarkably stupid seeming thing of building a big boat in the middle of the land. And then God fills it with all the animals together so that you've got this little floating Eden that can go through the near-death experience of the flood, and a remnant comes out of the other side into new life. But the thing is, God doesn't just save Noah, the chosen one who trusts him. God saves Noah and his crew, his wife and his kids and their wives. And it's interesting because nowhere in the story is there even a hint that Noah's wife or Noah's kids trust God. They trust Noah enough to be hanging around in the right place at the right time, to be rescued with the chosen one. But their faith is not highlighted at all. And in fact, if we read on a bit, we know that one of Noah's sons does something extraordinarily shady very shortly after they come on dry land. We won't go into that, but you can explore it at your leisure. But when they come through the near-death experience, then God says this to them. God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth." It's like, although they didn't, the hangers-on really, they weren't rescued because of their faith. They were rescued because they were around the chosen one. And as they come through into a new life, because of that relationship, they find a new life and a new role with God. Yeah? Get the drift? Okay, I mean, I nearly would put this up and said, who's this? But you haven't got a chance, have you? So I thought I'll label him. This is Isaac, and I don't know how familiar we are with Isaac's story. One of Abraham's sons. And one of the things that he does is he hears God give him the blessing that God has given Abraham. He repeats the blessing. Through you, I will bless the world. And God tells him to stay in the promised land where he called Abraham. And Isaac, as most of our ancestors and most of us do not listen to God. So there was a famine and a drought. And what Isaac did, instead of hanging on in Canaan and trusting, he moves down a little bit southwest, gets as far as the Philistines, where Abimelech is king. And he lives with Abimelech in the city. And God seems to prosper Isaac. And the Philistines, Abimelech's people, get a bit envious. And Isaac moves out, so he lives on the edge of the city, a little bit away from the Philistines, just to sort of keep the peace. And Isaac's boys need to have water for their flocks. After all, there's a drought going on. So they dig a well and they find water and they can water their flocks. And Abimelech's boys come and say, we want that water. Take over the well. And Isaac moves away, and Isaac and his boys dig another well, and they find water. And then Abimelech's boys, when they hear about it, they come and they take it over. And everywhere that God's chosen one goes, there seems to be this source of flourishing and blessing that God just pours out on him. And Abimelech's boys, the Philistines, they just keep following because they can see this blessing coming into the world. Now, there is no hint that they believe that Yahweh is the true God. But they do know God's blessing when they see it. So they just try to keep close to Isaac to enjoy. The Lord appeared to Isaac and said, I will confirm the oath I swore to your father. I'll make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, give them all these lands, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed. And the Bible says, and after they get water through Isaac, we saw that the Lord was with you, says Abimelech. So we track after you to pick up on that blessing. Okay, interesting underarm hair. Anyone tell me who this is?
Jacob.
Thank you very much. Jacob, picking up on the angels ascending and descending the stairway to heaven behind him. Anyone know anything about Jacob?
He's got a beard.
Clearly. A good guy or a bad guy? Well, what does God think about Jacob? God says this to Jacob. I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you're lying. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and through your offspring. Now, Jacob is a mess. Jacob's response to this promise is not to accept it, but to spend the next 2 decades, basically, swindling and cheating so that he will get the blessing. He's already done it, actually. That picture of him out in the desert, he's already run away from home because he swindled his brother, lied to his father in an attempt to get for himself the blessing that actually God has promised. So Jacob goes off and he goes to Mesopotamia, and he meets a guy called Laban, who is not a Yahweh follower. And he works for him as a sort of herdsman for a while. He gets swindled himself in that he's trying to marry one of Laban's daughters, and Laban slides in a different daughter at the crucial moments in a very, very unhelpful way. And eventually, Jacob has had enough of being here, and he thinks it's time to go away, and he wants to leave. And Laban won't let him go. And Laban says this: I have learnt by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Again, Laban is not saying, because you've been here and it's wonderful, I've discovered Yahweh, and I trust the Lord God who made heaven and earth. He's got his own gods and his own divination, his own roots to try and understand what's going on. But what he sees is that Yahweh has blessed the chosen one, and to be near the chosen one is such a blessing and has been such a blessing to him. What about this guy? Thank you. Moses. So most of us know quite a lot of Moses' story. Good guy, bad guy? Okay, so murderer to begin with, which would sort of limit our sort of normal estimation. But almost against his will, in fact, really against his will, God chooses him. When God meets him in the burning bush, Moses produces 5 excuses to say, no, you got the wrong guy. I'm not very good at talking. You don't want me. Eventually, he just straight out says, I don't want to do it. And God, in his incredible grace, says, I've got your brother coming. You can do it together. But there is a point when Moses and the people have gone out of Egypt. They're in the desert. God has given them the law. It's like a sort of marriage covenant. I will relate to my people like this. We will be together. And even as that is given, the people down the bottom of the mountain decide that they've had enough waiting. They make themselves a golden cow statue. They say, this golden cow is Yahweh who saved us from Egypt. And God is absolutely distraught. And he says to Moses, these guys, I will destroy them, and I will make a great nation out of you, the chosen one. But this chosen one actually takes it a little bit further than the examples we've had to date. And what Moses says is, no. You've chosen me to represent these people. I'd rather you take me out and save the people than destroy the people. This chosen one isn't accidentally good for the people around, but he actually steps in, intercedes, prays for, and with God's permission, brings life to people who are facing death. What about this one? Rahab. What do we know about Rahab? She lived in Jericho. She's not even one of God's people. She's a foreigner. She has a reputation as being a lady of the night. You have to question how come the two Hebrew spies ended up in her house, though. But they do. And she says this: I know that the Lord has given this land to you, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us. For the Lord your God is God in heaven and on the earth below. She has real faith. She has a real trust, a real knowledge that Yahweh is the true God. And she does a deal. So that when the Hebrew people come to take Jericho, because she has acted with faith, because she protected the scouts who had gone to spy out the land, the Hebrew people agree that we will let her live. We will save Rahab. Just Rahab? The city and all that are in it are to be sherems, like cleared, devoted to the Lord. But only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall be spared. Again, we're not told anything that would suggest that Rahab's family trust God. But we are told that they're close enough to the one who does, that God wraps them up in his salvation. They are saved from inevitable death and brought into the family of God. And Rahab takes her place in the family of God, a family which Matthew tells us in due course includes Jesus, because she is part of that line of descent that we are given. Or how about this rather Disney-fied, artificially generated image of someone? Who might this be? David. Okay, excellent. And what do we know about David? Okay, that's such a big question. I'd like to withdraw that question. We know that David is appointed by God. In fact, he is very obviously anointed and chosen. He's Messiahed. Samuel pours oil on his head to say, you are the chosen one of God for the next generation. And then the most famous thing about David happens, which is he goes to where there's a battle going on, and sorry, that's what I just said. The Lord said to Samuel, rise and anoint him. This is the one. Then David goes to where there's a battle going on, and there's a bit of an enemy, famously. Thank you. And David sees this battle in really spiritual terms. He says, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Now, all the army, David remembers just a shepherd at this point. The army of the Hebrew people, they've been looking at this guy feeling terrified. David looks at this guy and says, my God can beat you. And he's given the opportunity. And he acts on it. And Goliath, the picture of evil, is slain. And David is victorious. And is just David victorious? No. Who is victorious? Yeah. The very army who were too chicken to do anything about this guy who didn't have the faith and trust in God that God would give them a victory against this guy, when the chosen one has done the hard bit. It says what the army do is they run after the Philistines who are now fleeing, pick up all the plunder, and get all the wealth and reward and almost glory from David, the chosen one's victory, shared and given to them. Not because they learned from David as to how to fight well, but just because they were there when God's chosen one brought blessing into the world. The men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. When all the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. So have you got the pattern? What's going on? Yeah? Whether it is Noah or Abraham or Isaac or Jacob or Joseph or Moses or Rahab or David, when we read these stories in the Old Testament, when we find them in the Old Testament, they're not random collections of history. They're there showing us a picture of how God works in the world. And most importantly, they're there foreshadowing the fuller picture, the fuller rescue, the fuller salvation, the fuller gift of blessing that God gives through Jesus. So when Jesus is called the chosen one, it's not that he's chosen in that sense, but it's like, do you know all those other chosen ones? They've all been pointing to Jesus. So you can see what he is, what he does, and fundamentally how we relate to Jesus by being in the right place, hanging around, relying on him, and then picking up the goodies that come flowing in blessing from God in his wake. Peter says Jesus is the chosen one. But then he says, and now you are the chosen ones, a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. We come to Jesus, the living stone, the chosen one. But then remarkably, Jesus describes us in so many ways as then a chosen people to declare God's praise, to live such good lives that those around us who do not believe in Yahweh are blessed by our very presence with them. We can rest in Jesus because he's won the battle. He's done the hard work. So how do we respond? Well, the first thing, I think, is we really need to celebrate. In the same way as the Hebrew army celebrated, we are fickle, feeble, failing humans. If any of this depended on us, we're stuffed. So the first calling is to give thanks to the chosen one whose victory we inherit. And John, thank you for so many of the songs that we've sung this morning. That's what we've been doing, in being encouraged to acknowledge and be grateful and recognize that fact. It's not our doing. I did not fly back from Sydney. I just sat in a chair and someone else did the work. But also, we are called to be a new chosen people. And the picture of that is primarily to be a blessing to others. Not necessarily a source of condemnation or even good advice sometimes, but that God's love should flow through us to bless those around us. I urge you, writes Peter, live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and then glorify God. So let me finish with a question. How is God calling you, each one of us, to be a blessing to an outsider? To be a blessing to someone not yet in God's family? How can you be good news to them so that they in time will glorify God? What can you do that will bless others so that they may see and praise God for the love and the blessing He longs for them? Why not talk about that over coffee? Who could you be a blessing to? What might that look like for you? How can we be the good news as God's chosen to reflect Jesus' rescue into the world? Amen.